What's good? We are going to see how body proportions affect squat depth using physics simulations, using Blender 3D, fancy modeling software. Let's dive into it. All right. Welcome to the simulation. So here we have 7 human models. They are made in Blender 3D and they start from this reference. They're all technically cloned from this reference, which I just downloaded from wherever, and somebody made their proportions pretty average, it seems like, and by adding joints to each of these models, I was then able to modify their proportions. So if I zoom out, you can see all of the different models, and each of the models has a purple section, which is the torso, a red section, which are the thighs, and a blue section, which are the shins. And the point of labeling each of these sections is that I modify 2 of those sections in each of these models. So if we look at this model right next to the reference on the left here, you can see it says plus 5% thighs, minus 5% torso. So the thigh section is longer, the hips go higher, and the torso section, which is purple, is shorter. So I basically did every combination of lengthening and shortening the shins, torso, and thighs across all of these models. And the question is, how deep is the squat of each of these models? So that's what we're going to look at next. So now you see this, oh, what happened to this guy? Give me one moment to fix that. All right, fix that discombobulated person. So what you'll see now is a line of squatters, and each squatter corresponds to the model behind it and the proportions labeled behind it. So what you'll also notice is that all of these models are actually, or these squatters, are organized in order of squat depth, namely how far their hips are from their shins. So as you look farther down the line, you see a squatter with almost parallel hips to knees, which is great to see that there is some proportion that we were able to create just with this plus 5, minus 5 paradigm to get someone all the way down to parallel. And actually, you'll see the original reference squatter is pretty good, actually. The original reference squatter is not bad. So one critical thing that you'll see here that I used as a control for this experiment is the shin to foot angle. I tried to keep that shin to foot angle around 30 degrees, which is near the average range of motion limit for most people. And the significance of leaving that there is that we fix one joint to see how far in the squat you can go using just the other joints, rather than having all of these degrees of freedom available, making a much harder problem to solve to figure out what the good squat is, but also making it so that we hit a reasonable level of ankle mobility and don't just allow this person's ankles to compress ad infinitum, so to speak. There are definitely some people out there with some very mobile ankles, and some people use that as a strategy to sort of counteract some of the less favorable proportions. But let's look at who's the worst. So if I look all the way to the left of this line, we see +5 torso and -5 shins. Interestingly enough, +5 torso and -5 thighs is also the next one, is the next in the line. So our 2 plus torsos actually are the worst squatters. And if you just look at this, it almost makes sense because the torso contributes a lot of weight in whichever side of the body or of the feet it's on. And if that squat goes lower, it pulls the torso with it, which suddenly brings the center of mass way back. So these poor squatters aren't that great at squatting. They're quite far. If we look actually on the other side, well, the +5 thighs surprisingly is one of the better squatters, and the +5 shins is the best squatter when it has -5 torso. So this kind of makes sense, right? This is consistent. The -5 torsos are all the way on the right of the line and have the best squats of the group, right? These three right here. They're all almost parallel. Whereas the +5 torsos actually were the worst. So that's a consistent pattern, and that's a pretty interesting pattern, that long torsos basically create difficulty in squat depth. What's kind of surprising about this is that I always heard about long femurs, right? So if I look at these +5 thighs, I would have expected those to be all the way on the left. But actually, when we do +5 thighs but -5 torso, that torso factor is lessening and is still facilitating a good squat. It's really only when we do +5 thighs, sorry for all this navigation, but when we do +5 thighs and -5 shins, meaning we don't take the height from the torso, we take it from the shins, then it ranks third, right? So torso and then thighs seem to be the order of factors. And then the +5 shins bring us further to the right. So longer shins, which basically, if I can get one centered here, when we see +5 shins, what that does, it actually brings more weight forward as the knees bend, meaning that less of the torso is needed to go over, and well, it just allows a deeper squat. But still, this character here has +5 shins. Oh, so this is another interesting case actually. This is a +5 shins -5 thighs. I would expect it to squat pretty well, but since the torso is still relatively long, I guess it still doesn't do as well as any of the -5 torsos. But I guess I'm also surprised that that it didn't do better relative to the reference. I would expect that shortening the femurs actually would make a better squat than the reference. So that's kind of counterintuitive. Not sure exactly what's going on here. One thing to note is that there is a bit of a sort of volume redistribution that happens automatically when I change the um, joint positions. So maybe somehow the skinniness of the thighs here in the reference versus the chunkiness of the thighs here makes a difference, but I'm not totally sure. Well, that is it for the simulations. I hope it was informative, and at minimum, you can see very clearly how these small changes in body proportion can actually make a pretty big difference in squat depth and even the ability to preserve form at depth. So, if you liked it, hit the like button. If you're interested in more, hit the subscribe button. If you got questions or want to troll me, throw it down in the comments.